but we will stop it before there's any interaction. So yeah, we left before lunch with this question. As I said, if everything is impermanent, suffering and not self, can we find meaning then in life? And yet, obviously, it's very important to take that awareness, be aware that things are impermanent, and it does help. It does help to be aware. Just in a simple way. Oh yeah. So when I drop a glass and it breaks, you just think, oh, glasses break. But there is a level of real shock, as I was saying, in terms of actually really facing our own mortality, etc., and those of our loved ones around us. So it is a big question. So the question I asked the Buddha myself. I said, Buddha, what is your answer to this question of how do we find meaning? So I found this one of his suttas, and it is, for those who want to know, it's called either called the Pancha Sutta, which is called the Sutta of the Five, or the Anatta Lakkhana Sutta. So it was one of the first. There's 3 discourses, the first discourses when he began teaching. So as I was saying, the Buddha was brought up in a palace, so that sort of image of complete protection, of complete stability, comfort, and power over the dominion. And his father was so worried that if he thought this was not total all of reality, that something terrible would happen. And in fact, that is what happened. That the Buddha managed to be taken out of the palace, realized that the world out there was not. It was very impermanent. There were people ill. There were people dying. But he also saw that there was a sort of, what would you call it, a wise person. And he also saw that. So there was people who were trying to understand this. So when that happened, there was a shock. There was a total shock. He realized he couldn't live this life of being in a palace, in a stable, comfortable, and contained world. It's all mine. He couldn't live in it anymore. He had to find the answer. And so he went around, and he was in India, like Jiva says, 2,500 years ago. So there were people who were practicing, and my understanding, which is very limited, and I'm not a scholar, I'm just doing this, what interests me. But my understanding is there were people around who were very advanced practitioners in terms of meditation and what are called ascetic practices, which is that you really, so the idea was they realized that this attachment to the body was problematic, right? So how do you not get attached to the body? You actually do things to reduce its power over us, our desires. I mean, I don't know the details. I'm just saying, I've got in my mind this idea of people maybe fasting a lot, because I know the Buddha did fast to the point of nearly dying. So you sort of, the body wants me to go in this direction, I'm going to go in another direction completely. But at some point, the Buddha decided he got so ill, he was nearly dying, because he was doing all of these practices, got so emaciated he couldn't hardly move, he was on the point of death. And the story is that a woman gave him some milk to drink, and eventually he accepted, and he began to feel a bit better. And then he went through the whole process of finding his own way to we all call enlightenment. So one story of him becoming enlightened. And these are the first teachings. And what happened was, he got enlightened, he wandered about and thought, what am I going to do now? I'm enlightened. What do you do if you're enlightened? And eventually he was encouraged, and I don't know all the details, but anyway, he decided he should teach. He should teach people. And he bumped into 5 practitioners that he'd been doing all these ascetic practices with, and they were not happy with him, because they said, well, what are you doing? You decided to drink milk, you decided to eat, you decided to look after yourself. So maybe, you're going along comfort, back into comfort. So they weren't happy with him, but he taught 3 sermons to these 5, and that's why it's called the Pancha Sutta, the 5, Sutta to the 5. And he was able, like by the end, it's not very long, I won't read it all, but by the end of this, they said, oh, right, I think you've got something there. So I'll just read little bits of it, and then the bits that sort of really stood out to me. And the translations, none of them I like, but anyway, there we go. So, how the Buddha describes suffering, and this is again, there's a bit of Buddhist jargony thing, but there's basically 5, what are called the 5 skandhas, or the 5 aggregates, or that are, all our experience is made up of 5 things, 5 heaps of things. One is form, our body, form, feelings, perceptions, thoughts, or the way we form our world with our thinking, and our consciousness. So these, when we cling to any of these, and I'm just going to work on the form, the body one. When we cling to our body, when we feel we are our body, we suffer. That is one of them. We suffer. It's called, So, okay, so this is my little way of thinking about it at the moment. So either you go along, right, I'm going to try and diminish the power of my body, and I'll somehow find a way of becoming free. And that word was huge in that era, freedom, liberation from this. So he starts by defining suffering and this whole thing of not self, suffering and impermanence. He says, form is not self. If form were the self, would form not lend itself to suffering? It would be possible to say with regard to form, let my form be thus, let my form be not thus. But precisely because form is not the self, this form leads to suffering. So, very simple, I think that's a good way of thinking about it, if you really were in trouble, I am my body. I am my body. So why is it doing all sorts of things that I cannot control? Why is it getting ill? Why is it uncomfortable? If I had real control over my body, I would not. I would say to it, don't be uncomfortable. So it's a funny thing to think. All of these things are just ways of thinking. I'm sure you could think of something, oh no, maybe this is too simplistic or something, and it may be, but at least it's a way of thinking, that's interesting. And the same is true of feelings and thoughts, like I was saying to Sharon at lunch, if feelings were me, if my feelings were fully me, if I, he's saying, and there's another sutta which he talks about, and it's, if you were a king and you were in control of your dominion, would you let your feelings, like we all know, our feelings totally run riot, and they, we have no control over our feelings. So they're not me. So there is that sort of link between the not self, suffering, and then it says, is form impermanent or permanent? Well, it's impermanent, isn't it? Yeah, so it's impermanent. And through the 5 skandhas, they're all permanent. And if they're impermanent, is that called suffering? Yeah, that causes suffering. Okay, so we've got, they're not self, I've no control over them, they're impermanent, and they cause suffering. Right, so that's the diagnosis sort of thing. And then there's a statement of very clear, but it's very particular. It's saying every form, he concludes, every form is to be seen with right discernment as it has come to be. This is not mine. This is not myself. This is not what I am. And this is a big debate in Buddhism of, and you might have heard that there is no self. You know, how we are liberated is saying, oh God, I don't have a self. You mean I don't have to worry about that thing that's really annoying me, which is myself, because it doesn't exist. And this is a real, there is an interpretation of this to say, well, it doesn't exist, therefore I don't have to worry about it. I mean, you might have heard of Liberation Unleashed or something like that, which really works you through an awareness. And there's a degree of truth in that. The Buddha is saying it in this way. But my teacher Lama Shenpen very particularly has read this as, this is not mine, this is not myself, this is not what I am. It's not saying this is, therefore there is no me. This is not what I am. So it's saying, any consciousness, any feeling, this is not what I am. So that's really interesting. Okay, so and she really teaches this is one of very key teachings of Lama Shenpen is, this is what they're saying. I am not that, so I'm not that, I am not body. It's a very interesting meditation to go, I am not my body. But what am I? So what am I? So he moves on to say, well, if you have this awareness, you become, what it says, you become disenchanted with your form. It no longer has the hold over you. So instead of having to go through huge ascetic practices, just this awareness, I am not my body, I am not my body, means you just say, oh, I don't have to be so wrapped up in it, I don't have to be so worried about it, I don't have to be so affected by it. He uses the word disenchanted, and he becomes dispassionate. These are all words that have been translated, and they could mean other things. But this is the key little phrase that I'm going to read. And I'll read the different translations, because I don't like that one, disenchanted. When he finds estrangement, passion fades out, so that, with the fading of passion, he is liberated. And when liberated, there is knowledge that he is liberated. And there's a lovely translation in this, which is stolen from Amaravati, which is anyone here from the Khorasang? I don't know how it got stolen from Amaravati. It wasn't. But he says, becoming dispassionate, his lust fades away, and with the fading of lust, his heart is liberated. And when liberated, there comes the knowledge it is liberated. And then he understands birth is exhausted, the holy life has been lived out, what has to be done is done, there is no more of this to come, which is enlightenment. And then it says, when the five heard this, while this discourse was being delivered, the hearts of the bhikkhus in the group of five were liberated. So, what I get from that, I'm not interested in what anyone else gets, it's just that lovely phrase, the heart was liberated, because we've been doing a lot of work with our heart. So instead of having to, what suddenly just, I mean, I'm sure other people, I'm not a scholar at all, I haven't read much of this, but just reading the words in that more precise way made me feel, oh right, in that time, you know, they were saying, you just have to look, you just have to see, you just have to have this awareness that I am not my body, I am not my feeling. Once you have that awareness, the whole thing starts unraveling. So this dispassion, which is this sort of like, oh, I'm not that bothered. And there's all sorts of ways in which this has been read in different ways. But my reading is, as if, anyway, is that this whole connection to the body loosens up. And then the heart is liberated. So I am not, that phrase, this is not me, this is not I, this is not what I am. And at that point, the heart is liberated. Now that, for me, that moves me. Because it's saying that there is a way of being with ourselves that does allow, it's almost like, I mean, it reminds me of even the stories of near-death experience, is that, you know, there's a very rich experience as the body, that if you really go in, I get this at the dentist for some reason, when you're sort of stuck, and I sort of think, but I'm not this body. The dentist now has total control over my body. I'm not, but I'm still here. I'm still here experiencing. And maybe that's what it's going to be like when I die. That I'm going to be in hospital looking at these type of proceedings. But I have a sort of sense now that I'm going to be in my experience. I'm not going to be the body going, I'm going to be, oh wow, what's happening now? You know, that there is an I that is experiencing, and that's what I read, that the Buddha actually said that. This is not what I am. And it linked to what we were saying a bit earlier, you know, a lot of our journey in life is about a very complex journey as to who am I, what am I, what is my identity. And it can be based on my body, it can be based on my gendered body, or not, you know, and that can be complex relationship to my body. But there is a freedom. To me, that bringing in a freedom, and the phrase, the heart was liberated, just and then that relates to you know, it's actually quite a debate in Buddhism whether you believe that there is an entity outside of the body and feelings. Where would it be? You know, where does it exist? Has it got a form? Has it got a nature? And so there's a real debate about something. No, it can't exist. Or you can't say that it exists because who knows? Or some people just go, yeah, I experienced that. So anyway, that's my thought. So coming from that question, what does, to me, that I can't go beyond what I'm feeling at the moment really, but that hit me as a sort of, oh right, yeah, I can see how that gives meaning, like the heart of what matters. This gives meaning to a world that is impermanent, is suffering, and is not self. That as we see that, something in us is liberated because we realize we are not just that which is impermanent, that which is suffering, that which is not suffering. There's something in us. And I'll leave that with you, and I'd love, now if you can stop the recording. It's a huge